An entire cabin full of kids gets possessed. We were told when I became a camp counselor that our cabin was haunted. But every camp has stories like that. I didn't necessarily believe them. Then, one night, every kid in our cabin seemed to suffer from a paranormal event at the exact same time. I've never seen anything like it. And what's even stranger is that not one kid seems to remember anything strange happening. I can't fall asleep right now and figured I'd share my one and only potential paranormal encounter. It happened when I was 15, about 6 or 7 years ago, when I finally grew old enough to become a counselor at a summer camp I had attended annually for most of my childhood. The camp is Camp mnCommie in Plymouth, Wisconsin, if you want to check it out. You would imagine that a summer camp as large and old as mnCommie would have its fair share of scary stories and camp legends. But from my experience, that really wasn't the case. Ghost stories around the campfire were, of course, popular, but there weren't really any specifically about the camp itself. That is, except one commonly accepted notion among the staff that Thunderbird Cabin 2 is haunted. See, the camp is separated into a boys' side and a girls' side, and these sides are further divided into sections with names like Lakeview, Timber Trail, or, of course, Thunderbird. Counselors would rotate through sections throughout the summer. During the particular week of this story, I was stationed in Thunderbird and was assigned with another counselor, who I'll call Keegan, to watch over the infamous Cabin 2. Stories about Cabin 2 varied. Entities outside of the windows, goat men, scratching sounds at odd hours of the night, whatever. The diverse and often hyperbolized nature of these stories actually led me to doubt the legitimacy of them all. It's a much more likely explanation that there was a desire for ghost stories at camp, and that someone came up with Thunderbird 2 is haunted, which just happened to stick. I still believe this, in fact. I do not believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but I know what I experienced, and any rational explanation I can come up with does not seem fully convincing. Anyway, it goes as follows. This particular week, I was assigned to watch the youngest group of boys, aged from 6 to 8. We like to have everyone in bed early, since the young kids can be restless and they needed time to wind down. This particular night, things went smoothly for Keegan and I. We had seemingly gotten all of the kids asleep rather quickly. Being a little older, we would stay up and chat or read, and this night was no different. We both sat in Keegan's bunk, sharing a pair of earbuds and watching YouTube videos. It's important now to describe the layout of the cabins in Thunderbird. They were simplistic, rectangular, raised wooden cabins. The inner perimeter was lined with bunk beds and housed about 20 to 30 campers and 2 counselors. Small, high-set rectangular windows along all sides provide moderate moonlight at night. Anyways, we're watching a video and all the kids are asleep. It's totally quiet inside. You can barely hear the crackling of the dwindling campfire outside and the muffled normal sounds of a Midwest forest at night. That is, until something disturbs the peace. The unmistakable sound of someone shaking in a sleeping bag breaks the silence. It's clear from the noise and vibrations that one of the campers is basically flailing in their bunk. Their sleeping bag is rustling, the metal bunk is squeaking. The sound of their body bouncing on the mattress makes a dull thumping. Keegan and I quickly take out the earbuds, pause for a moment to listen to the sound, and turn to each other with a concerned, "What the heck?" look on our faces. Initially, I'm actually worried a camper is having a seizure. And then, on the other side of the cabin, we hear the same noise, the same vibration. Only a few seconds after the first camper started to shake, a second one joins in. Then another. And another, and another. Within 7 or 8 seconds, literally every freaking kid in this cabin is flailing in their bags. The sound of rustling fabric and straining bed springs is all you can hear. In the pale moonlight, you could also see the outlines of their bodies bouncing around a little. The entire cabin was vibrating at this point. Keegan and I were frozen, wide-eyed and terrified. We have had the same frightened look, and it was clear that neither of us had any idea what was going on or what to do. We sat paralyzed for some period of time, while the collective possession continued around us. After 15 or 20 seconds of this, the cacophony stops. Like a switch had been flipped, all of the campers stopped moving and went perfectly still, back to sleeping undisturbed. Still immobilized with fear, Keegan and I sit completely still as well, not talking or moving. I guess we were scared that this was simply the beginning of something worse. Unsure of whether to run or check the campers, both of us looked around, eyes darting to the door and the surrounding bunks. Minutes go by, both of us braced for impending doom. I'm not sure how, but both of us silently concluded at the same time that we should bolt. As fast as we could, we leapt from the bunk and sprinted out the door into the clearing outside the cabins. The only person still outside was our senior counselor, scrolling through his phone by the fire. He was surprised to see both counselors of a cabin dash out the way we did. Panicked, we tried to explain what the heck had happened. He brushed it off, but agreed to check out the cabin. As you can guess, he didn't see or hear anything but peacefully sleeping campers. We reluctantly returned to the cabin and got in our beds. Still on high alert, I lay awake for some time, braced and waiting for something. But alas, I drifted off at some point. Wouldn't you believe it, in the morning, none of the kids claimed to know anything about the previous night. They all claimed to have fallen asleep like any other night, and the phenomenon did not continue any following night. As someone who is wholly skeptical, and, as previously stated, does not believe in anything not well-founded or observed scientifically, I struggled to think what might have caused this. I want to think it was a prank, but I just don't think that a bunch of young children could coordinate something like this so well. Even more, I don't think they could maintain their innocence in the matter so effectively. This original poster's last point is the main reason a lot of commenters believe this story. It isn't that something strange happened, but rather that not one out of this group of children laughed or gave themselves away afterward. Kids aren't exactly the best liars. If they'd been pulling a prank, you'd expect at least one of them to sell it poorly. Someone brought up the idea of sleep paralysis. Of course, that raises the question of whether an entire cabin full of kids would suffer from sleep paralysis at the exact same time. If so, it wouldn't necessarily be the strangest thing that ever happened, but even that explanation is bizarre enough that OP would be right to think it was a little creepy. What do you think? Is there a viable explanation for what might be going on here? Does this story seem plausible to you? Let us know your thoughts on this story in the comments down below. My dog's spirit said goodbye to me. I've never experienced anything super paranormal in my life, just some things when I was younger that I look back on and find odd. But just last week, something very strange happened. I've read before where people have talked about feeling or knowing when someone passed away the moment they passed. But I finally experienced it myself. I was in my kitchen. Nobody else was home but my cat and dog. It was just me working from home. Then suddenly I heard a weird noise. It was loud enough to hear over my noise-canceling headphones. I looked around the corner to the top of the stairs and saw my cat. At first I thought it may have just been her making some weird cat noise, but she usually does that in the basement. Also, she was reacting to something, like she saw something down the stairs. She looked around, seemingly confused, then looked back down the stairs. She has never done this before. Nothing was downstairs. I had a really weird feeling about it, and my mind flipped to what I've read about before. So I quickly took a picture of the time in case anything else happened. 30 minutes later, I get a phone call from my mom. She's crying and says that our dog passed away unexpectedly and suddenly. I grew up with this dog, and it still lived with my mom in my childhood home. I asked immediately when this happened. She said about a half hour ago. My dog had passed exactly when I experienced that noise and strange feeling. I sent my mom the picture that said 2:49, and she freaked out. It's not a crazy story like some of the others you'll see posted online, but I felt oddly comforted by this experience on a deep, existential level. Either my dog came to say goodbye to me, or it was a super wild coincidence. I like to believe it's the former. This OP is right that stories about knowing when a loved one passes do seem pretty common. At the very least, they're common enough that it seems crazy to think all of them are lies. Sure, at least some could be based on weird coincidences, but I can certainly understand the appeal of believing they might be based on something more. It's hard to lose someone we love, even, or perhaps especially, a pet. So it's nice to think that they're capable of somehow saying goodbye. Honestly, that's not even the detail that struck me as craziest about this story. The detail I found truly weird is just that OP's cat has a specific part of the house where she goes to make strange cat noises. The cat thinks, it's time to make a weird noise. Better go down to the basement, like I always do. It was nice of Miss Kitty to break with tradition just this once, so OP would know something strange was happening. Cats are inherently selfish creatures, but this one was polite enough to telegraph that there was a ghost story in the works. That's a smart cat right there. If you made it this far in the video, consider liking and subscribing for more videos coming. A voice from beyond used to give me advice. I was born in 2003, so I'm 19 now. I don't remember exactly when it happened, but it certainly was between 2007 and 2009, when I was between 4 and 6 years old. There were days when I would ask questions about the world around me, which is natural for that age. The thing is, I recall at least 2 events in which I asked a question, and suddenly everything around me stopped moving for a very short time, as if time itself had stopped moving, but I kept going. I don't remember what questions I asked, but I'm almost certain one of them was about trees. While time was paralyzed, I heard someone talking to me and answering my questions. I recall that on both occasions, the voice who answered me was a soft, male voice. Anyone would be scared by that, but the voice was so friendly that hearing it made me feel at peace. After the voice answered my questions, and I hadn't known the answers before it gave them to me, so there was no way I could have just imagined it, time would return to normal, just like nothing happened. Eventually, after it happened the second time, it never happened again. I eventually forgot about it, save for a single occasion that I remembered back in 2012. Until 2019, when for some reason I remembered those events and never forgot again. Also in 2019, around October or December, I was in my grandparents' room staring at the night sky when my eyes fixated on a cloud for no reason. It was no different from any other cloud, but it made me curious, so I kept staring at it. Suddenly, a blue sphere of light passed through that cloud at an impressive speed. I didn't manage to look too much at it, but I remember that besides the blue color, it had a bright white core. I'm not sure if this is related to the voice that I used to hear when I was a kid or not. Both my grandparents also had experiences with UFOs when they were younger. My late grandpa saw one as a child, and my grandma was still a baby at the time, but her mother and grandmother saw one and then told her about it. Since I'm not very involved in the UFO community, I don't know if what OP's describing here is typical. Is it common for UFO encounters to run in the family like this? It seems like an unbelievable stroke of luck. Mostly, I just wish OP could remember what questions they were asking, especially the one about trees. I'm just trying to figure out what tree question a person can ask that's important enough for a ghost or alien to stop time in order to provide a proper answer. I could barely get half my childhood questions answered by the American education system. I'm not trying to suggest OP is simply making this up. October's going to be a pretty long month if I decide to doubt every single supernatural story that comes my way. But the phenomena OP describes are certainly incredible. What would you ask if you had a supernatural being answering your questions? Would you also ask about trees? Share your burning questions down in the comments. I don't believe in UFOs, but I'm positive I saw one. This happened to me approximately 15 years ago. I've tried to rationalize what happened to me so many times over the years and convince myself it never happened or that I was dreaming, but every time I do that, I keep coming back to how well I remember things about that day. I remember exactly what I was wearing. I remember the exact feel of the chilly breeze against my skin that day. And I remember the feeling of the cold stone step I was sitting on. I have never remembered a dream with such clarity. I had a bad childhood and grew up very poor. When this happened, I was about 17 years old. It was between 4 and 5 p.m. on an autumn evening, and I'd just had one of many huge arguments with my grandmother and my brother. I'd left the house in anger and sat down on the step outside to get away from them. Pretty much as soon as I sat down, I looked up into the sky above the houses opposite where I lived, and I saw this huge, black, thing silently hovering overhead. I've tried and tried over the years to be able to describe it better than a thing, but I just can't. I've tried drawing it, and again, I just can't seem to get it right. You know how a stealth aircraft has lots of angles to it? That's the closest thing I can compare it to. Except it looked like no human aircraft I've ever seen. It looked as if it had windows on the front, and I definitely got the impression that, just as I was staring at it transfixed, whoever or whatever was inside this thing was scrutinizing me as it hovered motionless and silent in the sky above me. I have no idea how long I stared at it for. It could have been a long time or just a few seconds. But I remember I felt absolutely no fear whatsoever during any of this, only a sense of astonishment at what I was seeing. I wondered if anyone else was seeing what I was. I don't remember seeing any other people on the street at the time, nor any vehicles passing. That's my story, and I have no memory of what happened after I saw it, nor do I remember taking my eyes off it. I'd forgotten about the whole thing for a number of years until a random conversation with my girlfriend somehow made me remember it. I've since researched the strange and paranormal, and I read somewhere that these types of encounters can occur to younger people or those who are going through periods of heightened emotional stress. I realize people are going to call me crazy or mock me for what happened, but I know what I saw, and I'd be very interested to get opinions from others or find out if anyone has ever encountered anything similar. Every once in a while, UFO stories take on very specific forms. This is one of them. Many people who claim to have seen UFOs describe a black, triangular sort of aircraft. Not everyone attributes them to aliens. Some think they're advanced human aircraft that are being tested in secret. I can't tell you what their purpose would be, but I'm sure there are a wide range of proposed answers to that question. Could that have been what OP was seeing? Were they simply stressed? Or did they see one of those same aircraft that seem common among UFO sightings? Nobody knows for sure. But it must be validating for OP to know that they aren't alone in having seen something fitting this exact description. And maybe that's what these stories do for people. It's not about getting to the bottom of what OP saw. So many of the people who claim these sightings were going through rough patches at the time. They were going through periods of isolation. For people living hard lives, something as basic as human connection sometimes seems as otherworldly as it gets. Knowing they share this common bond with complete strangers must be highly reassuring. And so, whether we believe them or not, who are we to take that away from them? Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.